Hey guys, welcome back. I have on the line our friend David Morgan from silver-investor.com, home of the Morgan Report, and I've been very excited about doing this interview with David because he has a new book out. It's called The Silver Manifesto, and it was written by David Morgan and his friend Chris Marchese, and it's truly an extraordinarily beautiful book, and any silver investor, anybody who is a passionate silver bull, is going to want to own this book. David, how are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you, Sean.
Hey, thanks for coming on, and thanks for sending me a copy of your book. You were kind enough to sign it. Before we talk about the book, though, David, I want to ask you about something that happened on Wednesday. I did a little video about it called The Dollar Flash Crash, a Harbinger of Things to Come. I think that it's very interesting that although you and I both know the dollar has a long way to fall in the future based on its declining value as the world's reserve currency, on Wednesday, after the market closed, there was an event. Perhaps it was algorithms gone mad. Perhaps it was something more sinister even than that. But the dollar did a flash crash, as Zero Hedge noted, and it lost somewhere in the neighborhood of 2, 3, 4, maybe even as much as 5% in a moment before bouncing back and then bouncing back fully on Thursday. Did you follow that event, and what's your take on something like that?
Yes, I did. I did note it, and the takeaway is volatility. That's extreme volatility. I mean, if you see any commodity and something that's got such a huge base, meaning there's so many of them out there, U.S. dollars, and to see that kind of a move in that short a time means that there's something very, very upsetting about the financial system.
Yeah, there's something wrong. We all know it, and we can really put a finer point on it and really quantify what's wrong. Most of our friends, neighbors, and colleagues cannot, but there's something very, very wrong. And even though the dollar bounced right back, you and I both know it has a long way to fall over time, and when it happens, it could truly come. The end could come like a thief in the night, and I think that's why it's important for people to have tangible assets, be it physical gold, physical silver, property, food, preps, anything that you can have ownership of, clear ownership of and title to tangible assets will be very important when this system finally collapses. And your book is truly a beautiful piece of work here. And I just would like to start here with Chapter 1, A Monetary History of Silver from 3400 BC to the Revolutionary War, David. And on page 23, you outline really wonderfully the gold to silver ratio over history, and going all the way back 3,200 years. And I'd like to note that in Egypt in 2000 BC, the gold to silver ratio was 2 to 1. How extraordinary is that? And then over time, we see moving all the way to 1850s Japan, it was 5 to 1, never ever going over 15 to 1, the gold to silver ratio. Of course, these days, David, the gold to silver ratio is somewhere in the neighborhood of what, 75 to 1?
Sure, I think it's, well, thank you for noting that. I think it's extremely important because this is, for me, the natural ratio is how it distributes in the earth. In other words, and that's about 9 to 1. So that's the natural, what is in nature ratio. The monetary ratio is what the market determines the ratio should be, which, as you mentioned, has varied roughly 2 to 1 to about 15 to 1 over that time frame, which is 3200 BC to roughly 1850. That's a lot of years. That's almost 5,000 years of history. So it's only in the last few hundred years where you've had this, 100 to 1, 70 to 1, 35 to 1, whatever, and touching 16 to 1, which is the monetary ratio that was a mandate, basically from Sir Isaac Newton. But the idea is that by any metric you want to measure silver, if you want to measure it versus gold, you want to measure it versus fiat, you want to measure it versus buying a house, whatever else, it's extremely undervalued right now.
Yeah, and forgive me, I should have probably started by asking you why you wrote this book. I want to let people know that it's available right now on Amazon.com. I do not get a piece of it. I'm not being paid to promote this book. Anybody who's a silver bull would really appreciate having this book, and it would make a terrific gift. It's $30. You can get it on Amazon, The Silver Manifesto. David, what inspired you and Chris to write this book?
Well, a lot of things, but the back cover talks about the primary purpose of the book, and I'll read that here in a second. But before I do, I'd like to preface it with, this is certainly a book that I think most, silver and gold people should have and read and have in their library and have for reference. But, I'm I am selling my own books. Well, I'll be full disclosure on that. But it really goes well beyond that. And this is really a book that should be in the library of any investor. But to get that point across is a little bit difficult because of my expertise in the narrow niche market that silver is. So from the back cover, in fact, the primary purpose of this book is to educate the reader as to why there is no way out of the financial morass by the political class or the financial elite. We have reached the point where the savvy few understand what is happening and take action, while the rest are left watching, thinking that the precious metals bull market was long dead. So my point is that the precious metals secular bull market is still intact. Most people have given up. Many of our brethren in the gold and silver community have given up or thrown in the towel, or now they've switched opinions, etc. But the truth of the matter is no fiat lives forever. The dollar won't. I believe in my lifetime that it will come to a head, which it already did really in 2008. We go into that in the book, and we really haven't recovered. So regardless of what the, as you call it, the propaganda press or the Mockingbird press states, Sean, the reality is far different than what you get from the smiley heads on mainstream TV. And that's a fact. So there's a lot of reasons, but that's the main purpose.
Yeah, that's an absolute fact. I can't imagine getting your monetary and economic news solely from a place like CNBC or the main three news networks, the main four news networks. But a lot of people do. And as far as people losing faith in the real money story, it's understandable, David, because the powers that be still control this paradigm. They manipulate the metals, and we're going to talk a little bit about that. But to your point, going back to the monetary history of silver in America, Chapter 2 here, the U.S. Constitution itself states, and a lot of people don't know this, Article 1, Section 10, no state shall enter into any treaty, alliance, or confederation, grant letters of marque and reprisal, coin money, remit bills of credit, make anything but gold and silver coin a tender in payment of debts. The history of real money made America a free place, a place where capitalism really meant something, where people were rewarded for hard work in a fair manner, and they didn't see their labor paid to them in money, in gold and silver, they didn't see their labor dissipate through inflation. And now that we've moved off this system, now that the criminal banks really have moved us off this system, we see people really in this country, we see the middle class dying. And we see people really falling prey to inflation and eventually, I think, hyperinflation. But the bottom line, David, is that gold and silver played a very important role in the foundation of our republic, didn't they?
Absolutely. And I'm going to have a little fun with this, Sean, if you'll allow me. I think there's several important parts of that Article 1, Section 10. But one of it is that no thing but gold and silver can be a tender in payment of debts. So having fun with this, for an example, and there's several you could use, if you got your property taxes and you call the assessor and you got him put in writing that that's a debt, and he says it is, and then you called them back or wrote them back and said, I think I've frauded you. I've used this private bank script to pay a debt, and Article 1, Section 10 says that I must use gold or silver to pay that debt. Did I make a mistake? Question mark. And then, of course, they won't know what to do with a question like that, or very few would. And the real answer, unfortunately, is that the court's buckled on this, and they'll bring up the legal tender laws, and they'll say, well, you really, it's okay to pay a debt with a debt. Which, of course, ask a 6-year-old kid if they understand not so much what a debt is, but can you create something out of nothing and use that as final payment? And the answer, of course, is on face evidence, no. And that's, of course, what the legal tender laws are really all about, is that you can pay a debt with a debt. And, of course, that's ridiculous, but that's the way commerce is conducted and has been for quite some time. So the point I'm making is that we've got away from honest money, and there is going to be a large price to pay for this. And unfortunately, it's the middle class that's paying that price. And it's because of this basically illegal system fraudulent system, this get something for nothing system, this good old boy system where everyone that is at the top and gets to create the money first and distribute it as they see fit into the money center banks and trickle down, is causing more and more disparity between the haves and have-nots. And these things have taken place in history before, and they have rectified themselves in sometimes manners that we certainly would not want to go through again. But as Santayana said, the greatest lesson of history is that people do not learn the lessons of history. So that's where we are, in my view, Sean. I wanted to have a little fun with that because you can't discharge a debt with a debt.
Yeah, I'm nodding, David, because you mentioned, criminal organization essentially that has taken us away from our real money. And our founding fathers fought against the central bankers. Our founding fathers fought against the reach and the tentacles of the Rothschilds. And it's noted here in your book on page 38 that the founders believed the government only served one purpose: acknowledging and protecting private property rights. I think it was Thomas Jefferson who said the only reason to resort to government at all is to protect our liberty. And here's the thing, talking about the central banks and the Federal Reserve, David, don't you find it interesting? If you Google Janet Yellen's name, and one of the top returns will be a Wikipedia entry about Janet Yellen. If you click on that, you will see a picture of her being sworn in, not by the president, but by Ben Bernanke. And that's about all you need to know. If you want to wake up your friends, neighbors, and colleagues, and they don't understand the Federal Reserve System, the central banking system, and how it has so much power, even more power than a sitting president, show them that picture and ask them, why is Ben Bernanke swearing in Janet Yellen instead of the president? It's astounding, isn't it, David?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I've been in this for so long, Sean, and I'm not weary at all. Still a very strong passion of mine. But going back when I was in my 20s, and we're going 4 decades now, I told people that the Federal Reserve was a bank, a private bank, and a corporation. I mean, I get the door slammed in my face as a metaphor. Most people just thought it was absolutely nuts. Now with the internet, most people are well aware of that fact. Even people that really don't understand the monetary morass, they understand that that's a private bank. So we have come a long ways, but it doesn't excuse the fact that things are controlled, and that the old adage that money is power is true, and that if you control the money, you control a lot of power, and you can manipulate things a great deal. Can everybody be bought? No, of course not. There are people with high integrity that cannot be. But for the most part, the political class can be, and that's very unfortunate, because this is the safeguards that we had at the foundation, because the idea was very simple, that all rights are God-given, and if you don't like God or believe in a higher power, that's okay. I am a libertarian. But they came from somewhere, and they don't come from man. So the idea was that your God-given rights were constitutionally secured. In other words, the only reason they formed government was to secure those God-given rights, those inalienable rights. And that was what the power of the government was ceded by the people, because the people held all power given to them directly from God. And because of that fact, they were willing to give a little bit to protect those rights. That's the whole idea. But my, how far we have come from those idealistic days to where we are today, where you almost need to get a potty pass from some authority figure to go wee-wee when you want to. I mean, it's really, really gotten to the point of where people like me, people like you, and people that have an understanding and don't live in front of the TV set and whatever program or being programmed by it, understand. And it's very upsetting. Not so much for me. I mean, I'm certainly going into my fall and winter years, but for my kids and my children's children. I mean, the really great spiritual leaders, in my opinion, and my study, are people that thought out 3, 4, 5 generations. What am I doing today that would affect my children's children's children? That was the philosophy. But today it's, how much can I get today? How much can I make by the end of the week? And that type of attitude. Really, it's upsetting to me.
Yeah, it's upsetting to me too. I have kids, and I think this type of book is a gift to them. I think that the system is doing a really good job of removing these generations, even recent generations. but certainly the current generation, from their divine rights, an appreciation for their divine rights, or even a knowledge of what a divine right is. Your rights are given to you by the Creator. No man can take those rights of liberty and the pursuit of happiness away from you. And they've done a great job of destroying this system that the founders tried to give us, that the founders set up and tried to give us. We're fighting to get it back, and I think that's what this conversation in this book is about, David. The Silver Supply in Dynamics, Chapter 3, and silver demand in Chapter 4. I want to talk a little bit about that because I think it's so important. I was speaking with Andy Hoffman just the other day about the dollar flash crash, and I told him a story about a friend of mine named Paul, who has a 60-year-old friend. Paul's been investing in silver for quite some time. He did know of your work, and he's got a 60-year-old friend who is very much into the stock market and has been for a long time trading the market. And his friend told him that he's nuts to continue to buy silver. He should sell his silver. It's a dead end, and he should get into the stock market. And David, what I said to Andy Hoffman about that when I shared that story is that I bet his 60-year-old friend doesn't know about the silver supply and dynamic story, nor does he understand silver demand. So let's talk a little bit about it because I think it's very enlightening. I learned something I didn't know. Chapter 4, silver demand. Here are some of the industries that use silver and rely on and depend on and need and cannot live without silver, David. Food packaging, medical uses, RFID, water purification, supercapacitors, automotive. Here's the one I didn't know about. 56 million ounces of silver per year are used in the automotive industry. Batteries, solar, the list goes on, and as you note in this chapter, David, the demand in the future, as technology continues to evolve, is only going to grow, isn't it? And that's the silver demand story that I bet that 60-year-old man does not know about.
Yes, I will make that presumption, and it's probably a valid one. The term that I like to use and have maybe overused is that silver is the best technology stock you can buy. And we go into the book that really silver's use up to roughly the year 2000 was in industry, a lot of photography. 1999 was the peak in silver halide film processing. From that point till now, it's diminished substantially. And I was well aware of that fact when I wrote this, Get the Skinny on Silver Investing. And I addressed it very honestly and told people that it wouldn't have an effect because that silver's recycled. But back on track, Sean, the high-tech world that we live in, anything electronic or electrical uses silver. You know, your iPhone, anything. So anything that you cross in a high-tech environment, which is, you know, North America and most of the world now, uses silver to some extent. And most people don't think about it because it's not something when you're using your iPhone, you don't think about how much silver's in it. And there's very little, but without it, you wouldn't have the reliability that you have. You could use a cheaper material, but it wouldn't have the reliability, and even Apple would be out of business. And that's a fact. You have to have silver in there. And there are other rare earths and there are other things. I'm not trying to belittle those, but silver is key. And it has been from 2000. And to continue what you suggested, Sean, and to reemphasize it, it's only going to grow. Why is that? Because as efficiencies grow, you will need more and more silver. The high lifestyle that we enjoy in the Western Hemisphere is based on what's called energy flux data. An energy flux is just a fancy way to say how much electricity do you use per capita? How much electricity do you have available to you per person? And the higher that level is, the higher standard of living you have. So if we were able to get free energy, as an example, and give all the world's people free energy, the plight of many would be vastly improved. Because if you look at from a practical, I'll put on my engineering hat for a moment and look at it from a practical perspective. Energy is vital for everything: transportation, growing food, communication, everything that humans do. Or from a more spiritual level, where you would get into the idea that everything is energy. The idea there would be that, of course, the more energy you have, quote unquote, perhaps the more spiritual you'd be. And I don't want to go down that road too far, Sean, but the idea is that nothing distributes electrical power better than silver. Nothing. Not gold, not palladium, not even graphene, none of these things. So silver is imperative, it's essential, and of course not very well understood unless you're one of those silver nuts that studies this market in that kind of a manner.
Well, here's what I think is interesting about it. We started this conversation talking about the monetary history of silver going all the way back to 3400 BC. And it's important to note for listeners, I think, David, that wars have been fought over silver. My friend Chris Duane just drove that point home in one of his interviews that I was listening to recently, in which he was talking about the war between the British Empire and China, and how HSBC, the criminal bank, was involved in this war over silver, essentially. And what's so interesting about it, David, is that not only have wars been fought over silver, not only has silver been highly valued and a truly precious metal, going all the way back to 3400 BC that we can document and probably beyond, none of these industries that you and I just spoke about existed. All of this new demand for silver in physical form has all manifested itself in the last 100 years. And the quickening is happening. The technological necessity for silver in these industries is only growing. And a great example of that is 56 million ounces per year of silver in physical form are eaten up and used and gone forever, taken by the automotive industry. That didn't exist 100, 150 years ago. So for the powers that be to say silver is a worthless investment, sell your silver, it's a joke, it's never going higher, it literally could not be further from the truth. They're telling you to get rid of and ignore one of the most precious physical, tangible assets on Earth.
Absolutely. I can't say it better.
So, David, let me ask you this. Before we let you go, because I know we're running a little long here, I want to talk about Chapter 5, Money and Banking. The fractional reserve banking system, which we're all well aware of, has done a really wonderful job. The bankers have done a wonderful job taking our deposits and then lending out, creating into thin air 9 times that amount of money, 10 times that amount of money. So if you put $100 in your savings account, the bank is going to write $900 or $1,000 of new loans into existence off that money. That's fractional reserve banking as it pertains to the paper system. But what's even more insidious, and to help people understand how out of control the Ponzi has become, there's fractional reserve bullion banking. I read about it here on page 110 in Chapter 5. Can you just help people understand how dire the situation has become for these bullion banks and explain what they've been up to?
So Chris and I, was a co-author effort, and we felt strongly that we had to have a chapter on money and banking, because with that foundational chapter, we were able to take that knowledge that we would, presume the reader reads and understands, to move into bullion banking. Because basically, if you understand how fractional reserve banking works, which is how the whole system is set up, and again, providing something for nothing from the top down on this private banking cartel, then you have a great foundation to go into bullion banking, which is fractional reserve way to do physical bullion. So there's all kinds of methodologies, and most of your listeners, Sean, are well familiar with, swaps and loans and deep storage. And I mean, there's tons of terminology around the gold and silver markets, but basically it's a fractional reserve system. So to say that you can't manipulate the market, and we go into that, as you know, is rather ridiculous on the face value. If the bank can create fictional money when you buy an automobile, as an example, or you get a home loan, and they just take that money, and as long as they have a reserve requirement of 1/10, so as you said, they can factor it by a factor of 10, and it's really greater than that. But regardless, the bank creates it out of nothing. The same thing with bullion. They have so much bullion, and they create a receipt which isn't really backed by the full amount of bullion, and they're able to use that as a derivative, which they can use in the marketplace as extra supply. So really, they're creating supply out of nothing. It's got the word gold or silver. It's got attachments to it because it's a legal fiction, meaning that in the fine print it might say, well, in the event that you stand for delivery on this over-the-counter derivative and it cannot be obtained, you agree that you will take X amount of fiat dollars in replacement of it. And it acts as if the value between gold and silver and fiat is always acceptable. In other words, that, well, why wouldn't you take, $1,200 the ounce? I mean, you can use it, you can spend it, you can go to Starbucks, and I won't argue that point. The point I will argue is the day of reckoning, there are people that will not accept the fiat for a variety of reasons.
Right.
And that's why this will fall apart at some point. And it has, really, as we all know, with, the German gold situation, I always mispronounce it, but the Dutch bank that had, physical holders of gold, and they said, sorry, we're going to have to settle in cash. You think those people were happy? They had a contract. They bought it physical, they wanted physical, and yet the bank comes up and says, oh, sorry, we can't, you're going to have to settle for this. I mean, these are problems in the system, and they will continue.
Yeah, and when we get into the idea of hypothecated and rehypothecated gold, it's like having a receipt for something that isn't there. Not only is it not there, it's been loaned out to somebody else, and that person has a receipt, and then that has been reloaned out to somebody else, and it truly is the very epitome of a Ponzi scheme. And David, you and I have explored these issues for so long. I mean, the point here is not to really share a ton of new information with our listeners. It's really to just get the word out about this terrific book. Can you tell people where to find the Silver Manifesto?
Certainly. The book is available on Amazon, and if you have a Prime account like I do, it can get shipped for free everywhere except 3 places. You cannot buy the book through Amazon in Canada, the United Kingdom, or Australia. Anywhere where the Queen's picture is on the coin or currency, it will not go. And in those cases, you can go to our webpage called thesilvermanifesto.com. And unfortunately, we are just charging you what it costs us. And for example, to ship to Australia costs almost as much as the book costs. We're trying to rectify it. We've been working with Amazon for weeks, and I'm not sure we'll be able to rectify it, but some people are willing to pay that, huge shipping cost. If we could lower it, we would. We just can't. There's involvement with customs and this type of thing. I mean, basically, the Queen doesn't like silver and hasn't for a long time. And if I digress slightly, Sean, please allow that Charles Savoy has done more work on that aspect of the silver market than anybody on the planet.
The Pilgrims.
And if you're really interested in the Pilgrims, which is a group that no one really hears about, they hear about, the Trilateral Commission and the Illuminati and all that. If you look at his work on the Pilgrims, you'll get a very, very strong understanding of what really goes on in the monetary realm.
Now, this is very interesting. I didn't know this, that your book in any of the territories, which are really still under the control of the Queen, a lot of people who live in Canada don't even know that she truly has so much power. The book, I'm holding it in my hand, you guys. It's when I say it's a beautiful book, it really is. It's about, 12 to 14 inches long by a good 10 inches wide. It's a good, big, substantial, beautiful book, and on the cover is real money, the founder's money, real silver, and real silver certificates. What is this now? Why won't they distribute this book in any of the regions over which the Queen yields power?
There's problems with the customs, and they have a problem with books. I mean, I don't want to go too far down the rabbit trail here, but the facts are very, very, very clear. They don't want to distribute the book. Amazon, I want to be very clear, Amazon will not distribute the book to those nation states, Canada, the United Kingdom, or Australia. So we have to do it. And unfortunately, it costs a great deal because of the customs issues to get in this material.
Understood. That's so interesting. So instead of going through Amazon, if you're hearing this interview, and a lot of our listeners, about 30% of our listeners are out of the country, what's the best way for them to get the book? To try to come through you, David, directly?
Yeah, the only way right now, until we rectify this one way or another, is to go to the web page, thesilvermanifesto.com. It's one word, the title of the book, thesilvermanifesto.com. And we will put it in an envelope, seal it up, take it to the post office, fill out the customs form, and mail it to you. And it's not cheap, but I'm touting my own book, but some people find it worth it. We've certainly shipped out quite a few. In fact, we're a little bit backlogged right now for some Australian orders and some UK orders.
Okay. Well, it's a terrific book, and that's why we wanted to have this conversation. I wanted to get the word out about it. It really encompasses, it's pretty much all of the interviews I've ever done are, really in this book. The content of the interviews I've done, over 600 videos since 2011, it's all in this book, and it's a really great digestible way to retain this information for future generations. Give it as a gift, buy it for yourself, and appreciate it for what it is. It's a valuable piece of history, and our guest has been David Morgan from silver-investor.com, home of the Morgan Report. David, it's always a pleasure to speak with you.
Sean, thank you for giving me your time.
And that pretty much wraps it up, guys. Thanks so much for tuning in. We very much appreciate your support at sgtreport.com. Check out thephaser.com as well. and thelibertymill.com, real news 24/7. Have a terrific week.